6 philosophical stories about God to help you live happily. Story 1. I always trust you, Dad. In a distant village in Israel, there lived a devout man named Eliab. Eliab was a righteous man, deeply committed to following the will of God. His faith had been tested in many ways throughout his life, but nothing could prepare him for the most difficult trial he would face. One night, as Eliab slept, he had a vivid dream. In the dream, God's voice echoed in his heart, commanding him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, as an offering to the Lord. The command was clear and unwavering. Take your son, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Genesis 22, verse 2. When Eliab awoke, his heart was heavy with confusion and sorrow. He had heard the voice of God clearly, but the thought of sacrificing his son seemed impossible. Yet he knew he had no choice but to obey. The next morning, he prepared for the journey. He packed some provisions, and with a heavy heart, he told his beloved son, Isaac, that they would be going to the mountains. Isaac, being a young boy, had never ventured into the mountains before, and he was filled with excitement and curiosity about the adventure. He did not know what awaited him, only that his father was taking him to a new and mysterious place. As they began their journey, the two of them walked together, with Isaac skipping ahead, unaware of the great burden his father carried. Eliab tried to remain composed, but his heart ached at the thought of what he was about to do. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, the weight of the task grew heavier. Eliab's hands trembled as he prepared the altar for the sacrifice, and he struggled to find the strength to carry out God's command. As they reached the base of the mountain, Isaac, sensing his father's distress, asked, Father, we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Genesis 22, verse 7. Eliab's heart broke at the innocence in his son's voice. How could he explain to Isaac what he was about to do? He looked down at his son and with tears in his eyes said, God will provide the lamb, my son. The two of them continued, and Eliab built the altar and arranged the wood. He then bound Isaac and placed him on the altar, preparing to carry out the unimaginable act that had been commanded. Just as Eliab lifted the knife, ready to sacrifice his son, a voice rang out from heaven. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Genesis 22:12. Eliab froze in shock, his heart racing. God had intervened at the last moment, sparing Isaac's life. Looking up, Eliab saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns, a provision from God to fulfill the sacrifice. Eliab was filled with gratitude and awe. He had trusted God even in the face of the most difficult test, and God had shown his faithfulness. He took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son, praising God for his mercy and provision. This story, from the life of Eliab and his son Isaac, is a powerful example of faith, trust, and obedience. Eliab's willingness to sacrifice his son, even though it seemed impossible, reflects the ultimate obedience to God's will. In the Bible, God often calls his followers to trust him fully, even when the path is unclear or difficult. In the case of Eliab, his faith in God was tested to its limit, but in the end, God provided a way out, showing his love and care for his faithful servant. As Jesus teaches in Matthew 17:20, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Eliab's faith was not about understanding the reasoning behind God's command, but about trusting in God's plan, even when it seemed impossible. God was testing Eliab's trust, and Eliab's willingness to obey without question demonstrated his unwavering faith. This story also speaks to the importance of trusting in God's provision. Eliab did not know how God would provide, but he trusted that God would fulfill his promise. In Philippians 4:19, we are reminded, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. Just as God provided a ram in place of Isaac, he will provide for us in our moments of need, showing his faithfulness and love. The lesson of this story is clear. Obedience to God requires total trust in his plan, even when we cannot see the way forward. Eliab's willingness to trust God, even with the life of his son, is a model of the kind of faith we are called to have. In our own lives, we may face challenges that seem impossible, but like Eliab, we are called to trust God's provision and timing. As Proverbs 3:5-6 teaches, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Through this story of faith and trust, we are reminded that God's love and provision are always with us, even when we face the greatest challenges. Like Eliab, we are called to trust God with all our hearts, knowing that he will guide us through even the most difficult trials. God's faithfulness is unshakable, and he will always provide for those who trust in him. Story 2. The Power of Dialectic. One day in a small village nestled in the hills of Judea, a wise teacher named Rabbi Nathan gathered his disciples to share a profound lesson. The rabbi, known for his deep understanding of the scriptures and his ability to provoke thought, often used simple yet powerful questions to illustrate spiritual truths. On this particular day, as the sun cast long shadows over the village, Rabbi Nathan posed a question to his disciples. Imagine two men, one clean and pure, the other dirty and unkempt. They both approach a river. Who do you think will step into the water to bathe? One of the disciples, eager to answer, responded, "The dirty man, of course. He is the one who needs to cleanse himself." Rabbi Nathan shook his head, smiling gently, and said, "No, that is not correct. Why should the dirty man bathe? He has grown accustomed to filth. But the clean man, who strives to maintain his purity, would be the one to seek cleansing. He desires to keep himself clean, even when he is already pure." The disciples were puzzled, and some of them exchanged uncertain glances. Rabbi Nathan continued, "Let me ask you again. Two men, one clean and one dirty, both arrive at the river. Who will step into the water to bathe?" A different disciple, thinking he had understood the point, confidently answered, "The clean man. He wants to maintain his cleanliness, so he will bathe." Again, Rabbi Nathan responded, "No, that is still not the correct answer. Why would the clean man need to bathe? He is already clean. It is the dirty man seeking to purify himself who will step into the water." At this point, the disciples were increasingly confused. They could not fully grasp the meaning of Rabbi Nathan's questions. The rabbi, seeing their confusion, paused for a moment before asking one final question. "Now, let me ask again. Two men, one clean and one dirty, come to the river. Who will bathe?" This time, the disciple, feeling sure of himself, boldly responded, "Both of them will bathe." Rabbi Nathan smiled knowingly and said, "No, neither of them. Why would they bathe? The clean man is already clean, and the dirty man has become so accustomed to his filth that he does not feel the need to change. It is not about the outward appearance. It is about the condition of the heart." The disciples were silent, reflecting on the rabbi's words. They had expected a simple answer, but Rabbi Nathan had led them to a deeper understanding. It wasn't just about cleanliness in a physical sense, but about the state of one's soul and the desire for inner transformation. In this lesson, Rabbi Nathan had shown his disciples that true purity is not simply a matter of external appearances, but of the heart. A person who is already clean may not feel the need to seek cleansing, but someone who is aware of their impurity will desire to be transformed. This truth is echoed in the Bible, where Jesus teaches that true purity comes from the inside out. In Matthew 15, verse 18-19, Jesus says, "But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander." True righteousness is not about outward rituals or external cleanliness, but about the transformation of the heart. In Isaiah 16:17, God calls his people to wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. The dirty man in Rabbi Nathan's story represents the sinner who is far from God, while the clean man represents the righteous who may feel no need for change. But true righteousness is not about being complacent. It is about seeking continuous growth and transformation. Jesus himself taught the importance of humility and the need for repentance. In Luke 18:13-14, he tells the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. The Pharisee, confident in his own righteousness, prays with pride, while the tax collector humbles himself and asks for mercy. Jesus concludes, "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." The dirty man in the rabbi's story who recognizes his need for change, is like the tax collector, humble and willing to be transformed by God's grace. Rabbi Nathan's teaching highlights a crucial lesson. True righteousness is not about how we appear to others, but about the condition of our hearts. The clean man may be complacent in his purity, while the dirty man, who recognizes his need for change, is the one who is truly seeking transformation. The act of bathing in the river is a metaphor for the spiritual cleansing that comes through repentance and faith in God. It is through God's grace that we are made pure, not by our own efforts or appearance. In this light, the story calls us to examine our own hearts. Are we like the clean man, satisfied with our outward righteousness, but neglecting the deeper transformation that comes from God? Or are we like the dirty man, recognizing our flaws and seeking to be changed by God's mercy? As Psalm 51:10 says, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." This is the true path to purity, seeking God's cleansing and transformation from the inside out, not relying on outward appearances or rituals. Rabbi Nathan's lesson teaches us that the power of righteousness lies in the transformation of the heart, the willingness to seek God's grace, and the humility to acknowledge our need for change. True purity is not about external acts, but about an internal renewal that aligns our hearts with God's will. Story 3. Teeth lost, tongue remains. In ancient Israel, there was a wise teacher named Rabbi Eliezer, who was known for his deep understanding of the scriptures and his ability to communicate profound truths through simple yet powerful teachings. Rabbi Eliezer had many disciples who sought his guidance on matters of faith, life, and the human spirit. One day, as he sat with his disciples in the village square, he was approached by one of his followers, a young man named Simeon, who had come to visit him in a time of uncertainty. Simeon had recently encountered a series of challenges in his life, and he was struggling to understand how to face the difficulties that lay ahead. He had always been taught that strength, resolve, and a firm will were the qualities that led to success. But as he faced the trials of life, he found himself feeling weak and unsure. Seeking wisdom, he turned to Rabbi Eliezer for guidance. Rabbi Eliezer, sensing Simeon's inner turmoil, decided to teach him a valuable lesson. He invited Simeon to sit beside him and asked, "Simeon, have you ever considered the nature of strength and weakness?" Simeon looked at his teacher, unsure of what he meant, and replied, "Strength is what we need, Rabbi. It is what we strive for in order to overcome obstacles and succeed." Rabbi Eliezer nodded thoughtfully and then shared a simple but profound lesson. He leaned forward and asked Simeon, "Let me ask you this. What is stronger, a mighty oak tree or a humble reed by the river?" Simeon thought for a moment, recalling the towering strength of the oak tree that had stood firm against the winds for many years. He answered, "Surely the oak tree is stronger. Its roots run deep and its trunk is thick and unyielding." Rabbi Eliezer smiled, sensing that his disciple was missing the deeper meaning of the question. "Yes, the oak tree is strong in appearance, but let me tell you this. When the storm comes, it is the oak that may break, and the reed that bends but does not break. The reed is flexible, it gives way to the storm but does not break. It may appear weak, but in its humility, it survives." Simeon was taken aback by this insight. He had never thought of strength in such a way before. Rabbi Eliezer continued, "In the same way, true strength is not always about being rigid and unyielding. Often, it is found in humility, in the ability to bend without breaking, to be gentle and yet unwavering in faith. Remember what is written in James 4:6, "God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble." Simeon pondered these words deeply. Rabbi Eliezer then shared a story from the scriptures to illustrate his point. He spoke of the mighty king Saul, who, despite his strength and power, was ultimately overcome by pride and disobedience to God. His downfall came because he could not humble himself before the Lord. On the other hand, David, the young shepherd, was humble and obedient, and though he was weak in stature, he was strong in faith and overcame Goliath with a simple stone and a slingshot. Rabbi Eliezer looked at Simeon and said, "Simeon, the true strength that comes from God is not in the outward appearance, but in the heart that is humble and willing to submit to his will. As it is written in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9, 'But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Simeon began to understand. The power of humility, the willingness to bend and not break, was the true source of strength. Strength was not just about physical power or dominance, but about the ability to surrender to God's will, to remain steadfast in faith despite life's challenges. In that moment, Simeon felt a sense of peace and clarity. He no longer needed to rely solely on his own strength, but could trust in God's guidance and power to overcome adversity. Rabbi Eliezer's lesson was a reminder of the power of meekness and humility in the eyes of God. As Jesus taught in Matthew 11, verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." In a world that often values power and dominance, the humble heart is the one that finds favor with God. Simeon left Rabbi Eliezer's side that day with a renewed understanding of strength. He no longer saw strength as the ability to stand firm against the storm, but as the capacity to bend with grace and faith, trusting that God would carry him through. As Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." Through Rabbi Eliezer's teaching, Simeon learned that true strength is found in humility, in submitting to God's will, and in trusting that his power is made perfect in our weakness. In this humility, Simeon found the strength to face his challenges with peace, knowing that God was with him every step of the way. This lesson, rooted in the wisdom of the scriptures, teaches us that true strength is not in pride or self-sufficiency, but in humble submission to God. In every trial, God calls us to rely on him, to bend but not break, and to find strength in his grace. And through this, we are transformed, becoming strong in our weakness and unwavering in our faith. Story 4, Mysterious Door. In the land of Judah, during a time of peace and prosperity, there was a great king, King David, who ruled with wisdom and strength. His kingdom was vast, and his people were loyal and prosperous. Yet, as all kings do, he eventually faced the challenge of finding a successor who would continue his legacy and lead the people with wisdom and righteousness. King David called upon his trusted advisors to help him find a man of great intellect, one who could be his right-hand man and continue the work he had started. After much deliberation, 3 men were brought before the king. The first was a renowned scholar, a man of numbers and logic. His mind was sharp, and he could solve any mathematical problem presented to him with ease. The second was a philosopher, a thinker who could argue any point with eloquence and clarity. His ability to reason and find meaning in the world was unmatched, and he could create new worlds with his thoughts. The third man was a humble priest, a man who trusted in the Lord with all his heart. He prayed daily, seeking guidance and wisdom from God. His faith was steadfast, and his heart was pure. The king, seeking to test these 3 men, devised a challenge. He told them, "You will each have 3 days to prepare for a test. On the 4th day, you will come before me, and I will judge who among you is the most capable of leading my people. You must prove your wisdom, your intellect, and your ability to think on your feet." The scholar, the philosopher, and the priest each went to their chambers to prepare in their own way. The scholar, knowing that the test would involve complex reasoning, spent every waking moment solving mathematical problems, writing equations, and analyzing patterns. He was determined to be ready for any intellectual challenge. The philosopher, always thinking in abstract terms, pondered deep questions, read volumes of philosophical texts, and prepared his mind for any argument that might be presented. The priest, however, took a different approach. He spent his time in prayer, asking God for wisdom and guidance. He knew that true wisdom came not from human understanding, but from God alone. On the morning of the 4th day, the 3 men arrived at the king's court. The scholar and the philosopher looked weary, their minds strained from the intense preparation. The priest, however, was calm and composed, his heart full of peace. The king, seeing the state of his contestants, led them into a small room where the challenge would take place. In the center of the room was a locked door. The king explained, "There is a riddle before you. The key to this riddle lies in unlocking this door. You will each have a chance to solve it. The man who opens the door first will be the winner. The scholar immediately began examining the door, analyzing every detail, looking for a mathematical pattern or a hidden code that would unlock the door. The philosopher, not one to be outdone, began to philosophize about the nature of the door, trying to reason out its purpose and meaning. But the priest, with a humble heart, simply walked over to the door and tried the handle. To his surprise, the door opened easily. There was no lock, no riddle to solve. It was simply a door that had been closed without reason. The priest stepped through the door, and the king, who had been watching from behind, entered the room and addressed the two other men. "Why are you still here? The test has ended. The priest has already passed." The scholar and philosopher were baffled. They had spent so much time and energy preparing for a complex riddle that they failed to see the simplicity of the solution. They turned to the priest, asking how he had managed to open the door. The priest, with a humble smile, replied, "I did not rely on my own wisdom. I prayed, asking God for guidance. In my heart, I heard a voice reminding me, 'Why overcomplicate the task? Try the door and see if it is locked.' And so I did, and the door opened." The king, impressed by the priest's faith and wisdom, said, "You have proven that true wisdom does not lie in intellectual power alone. It lies in trusting in God and following his guidance. As it is written in James 1:5, 'If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him.' The intellect can be a gift, but it must be guided by faith in God's wisdom." The scholar and philosopher, though disappointed, understood the lesson. The priest's success was not due to his own knowledge, but his reliance on God's wisdom and his trust in God's guidance. The king then declared, "This man, the priest, will be the one to guide our kingdom. His wisdom is not only in his intellect, but in his humility, faith, and trust in the Lord." The lesson that day was clear. True wisdom comes not from human effort alone, but from trusting in God's guidance. In Proverbs 3:5-6, we are reminded, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." The priest's humility and faith in God's will had led him to success, while the scholar and philosopher, relying only on their own understanding, had missed the mark. This story serves as a reminder that while knowledge and intellect are valuable, it is our trust in God and our humility before him that truly leads to wisdom. As Psalm 111:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All who follow his precepts have good understanding." Through faith and trust in God, we can open doors that no human understanding alone could ever unlock. Story 5, Last Day. In a small village nestled near the hills of Judea, there was a wise elder named Simeon who had lived many years in solitude. Simeon was known for his deep understanding of the scriptures and his ability to offer wisdom to those who sought it. One day, a young man named Nathan, a wanderer on a spiritual pilgrimage, arrived in the village. Nathan had heard of Simeon's wisdom and decided to seek him out. After a long journey, Nathan finally reached the humble dwelling of Simeon. As he approached the wise elder, he found Simeon sitting quietly in the shade of a tree, his long white beard flowing gently in the breeze. Nathan bowed respectfully and asked, "Master Simeon, I have traveled many days to seek your wisdom. I have one question that weighs heavily on my heart. If you knew you only had one day left to live, what would you do with that day?" Simeon, who had seen many seasons of life, slowly stroked his beard and considered the question. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Well, if I had but one day to live, I would first write a few words of reflection, then perhaps sit by the window and drink some tea, feeling the warmth of the sun. I would spend some time in my garden, pulling weeds and tending to the plants. I might also walk around the village, seeing the familiar faces of my neighbors, and then, in the quiet of the afternoon, I would take a short rest." Nathan, eager to understand the deeper meaning of Simeon's response, interrupted, "But master, these are all things you do every day. Surely you would do something different if you knew your time was so short." Simeon smiled gently, his eyes filled with peace, and answered, "Yes, Nathan, these are indeed my daily tasks. But tell me, why should the last day be any different from the others? Life is lived in moments. each day a gift from God. If I had one day left, I would live it as I live every day, by embracing the simple joys of life and giving thanks for them. Nathan was confused. He had expected a profound answer, something that would reveal the urgency of life's fleeting nature. He questioned Simeon again, his voice filled with curiosity. "But Master, surely the final day of life carries more significance? Shouldn't we spend our last day in a way that reflects its importance?" Simeon, with a look of understanding, replied, "Nathan, the final day of life is not inherently different from any other day. The final day is hidden within all the days we live. It is like the thief that comes in the night, quietly and without warning. Each day holds within it the possibility of being our last, and so it is not the final day itself that matters most, but how we choose to live each day. As it is written in James 4:14, 'Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes.'" Nathan sat quietly, reflecting on Simeon's words. The wisdom of the elder was profound. It was not the final day that made life meaningful, but how one lived every day. Simeon had taught him that the quality of life was found in the simple acts of love, reflection, and gratitude, not in the fear or anxiety of an uncertain end. Simeon continued, "Every day is a gift from God, Nathan. Each moment is an opportunity to live in faith and obedience to his will. The Lord tells us in Matthew 6:34, 'Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself.' Each day has enough trouble of its own. What we must focus on is not the unknown of the future, but the present moment, trusting in God's provision and grace." Nathan now understood. Simeon was teaching him that life's true value was not in the grand gestures or in the certainty of its end, but in the small, faithful actions taken each day. Life was to be lived in alignment with God's will, in humility, gratitude, and love. It was in the ordinary moments, in the acts of service, prayer, and kindness, that one could find the profound purpose of life. As the sun began to set, Simeon stood up slowly and walked with Nathan toward the edge of the village. They walked in silence, each step a reminder that life was short, but it was also precious. Simeon then quoted from the Psalms, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Psalm 90, verse 12. Every day, no matter how ordinary it seemed, was an opportunity to grow in wisdom, to seek God's presence, and to live in a way that honored him. Nathan felt a deep sense of peace settle in his heart. He realized that he had been focused on the wrong things, worrying about the future, the unknown end of life, instead of living fully in the present moment. Simeon had shown him that the key to living a meaningful life was not in the fear of the last day, but in embracing each day with faith, humility, and gratitude for God's grace. As they reached the village gate, Simeon turned to Nathan and said, "Remember, Nathan, the last day is but a continuation of all the days that have come before it. Let your life be marked by love, by service, by prayer, and by faithfulness, and the final day will be a day of peace, knowing that you have lived well." Nathan bowed deeply before Simeon, thanking him for the wisdom he had shared. As he walked away, he carried with him the understanding that the final day was not something to fear, but a culmination of a life lived with purpose, humility, and trust in God's providence. In the end, it was not the last day that defined a person's life, but how they lived each day in service to God and others, trusting in his plan and his grace. As we are reminded in Matthew 25, verse 23, his master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." The happiness of the final day is found in the faithfulness of every day before it. In a small town in the heart of Judea, there lived a humble teacher named Rabbi Samuel. Known for his wisdom and understanding of the scriptures, Rabbi Samuel was highly respected by his disciples. One day, a young man named Elijah, a seeker of truth, came to Rabbi Samuel, hoping to learn more about faith, perception, and the power of belief. Rabbi Samuel, sensing the young man's desire for deeper knowledge, invited him to sit down by the fire and listen to a story that would reveal an important lesson. As they sat together, the rabbi began, "There was once a man named Robert Rosenthal, a teacher and researcher in a distant land. He conducted a fascinating experiment with animals. But the lesson from his work is one that I believe holds great spiritual significance for us. Let me tell you the story. Rabbi Samuel spoke of an experiment that Robert Rosenthal had conducted in a university, though it was a different time and place. In the story, Rosenthal had taken two groups of laboratory rats and told his assistants that one group was special, intelligent and capable of learning tricks, while the other group was ordinary, with no special abilities. The assistants were told that the special group required more advanced training techniques, while the ordinary group could only be trained using basic methods. As the experiment proceeded, the rats were placed in a maze where they needed to find their way to food. The intelligent group of rats, trained with special methods, quickly navigated the maze and reached the food. Meanwhile, the ordinary rats, trained with basic techniques, struggled and took much longer to find their way out. When the experiment was concluded, Rosenthal revealed an astonishing truth to his assistants. He had not chosen the rats based on intelligence. In fact, he had selected them randomly, without knowing which rats were more capable. The only difference in the training was the belief that the special rats were intelligent and worthy of extra attention. The results showed that the rats who were perceived as intelligent, even though they were not chosen for their abilities, performed better than those who were seen as ordinary. Rabbi Samuel paused for a moment to allow Elijah to reflect on the story. He then continued, "You see, Elijah, this story is not merely about rats. It is about the power of belief and perception. The assistants believed that the rats in the special group were capable of great things, and because of that belief, they treated those rats with more care, more patience, and more attention. As a result, those rats lived up to their perceived potential. In contrast, the rats that were deemed ordinary did not receive the same level of attention, and consequently, they did not perform as well." Elijah, deeply moved by the story, looked at Rabbi Samuel and asked, "Rabbi, what does this story have to do with our faith in God? How can this lesson be applied to our lives?" Rabbi Samuel smiled warmly, his eyes filled with understanding, and he said, "The answer lies in the teachings of Jesus. Just as the assistants brought beliefs about the rats influence their treatment and performance, our faith in God influences how we live, how we perceive ourselves, and how we perceive others. When we believe that God has created us with purpose and potential, we will act in ways that reflect that faith. As Jesus said in Matthew 17:20, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Rabbi Samuel continued, "The lesson from the experiment is clear. When we perceive others through the eyes of faith, when we believe in their potential as children of God, we empower them to live up to that potential. In the same way, when we believe in God's ability to work in our lives, we open ourselves up to the possibilities He has for us." He paused for a moment, reflecting on the words of the scriptures before adding, "Think of how Jesus saw the potential in His disciples. They were ordinary men, some fishermen, some tax collectors, yet He saw in them the potential to build His church. He believed in them, and through His faith in them, they were able to accomplish great things." In John 14, verse 12, Jesus promises, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father." Elijah, now deep in thought, realized the profound truth that Rabbi Samuel was teaching. The way we perceive ourselves, the way we see others, and the faith we place in God can shape our lives in remarkable ways. Our faith is not just about believing in the unseen. It is about believing in the potential that God has placed within us and within those around us. Rabbi Samuel concluded, "In your life, Elijah, always remember that faith is a powerful tool. It is not just about believing in the unseen, but about trusting in the potential that God has given to you and to others. When we believe in God's promises, when we have faith in His plans for us, we open ourselves to a life of purpose, transformation, and limitless possibilities." Elijah, filled with a new sense of understanding, thanked Rabbi Samuel for his wisdom. As he left the rabbi's house that day, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that his faith in God and the way he viewed others would have the power to shape his life and the lives of those around him. He understood that with faith as small as a mustard seed, nothing would be impossible. In the same way, each of us is called to see the potential in ourselves and others through the eyes of faith. When we believe in God's goodness and His plans for us, we unlock the potential to do great things in His name. As Philippians 4:13 reminds us, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. With faith, we can overcome any obstacle and fulfill the purpose God has set before us.